The Dark Below. This story is based on a true event. The tragedy happened during the Cold War period on January 9, 1987. The mission was to test the capabilities, dive rate, maneuverability, sonar profile and resilience to prolonged deep dive conditions. The tests were carried out from a Russian research vessel built to look like an old American fishing trawler. The mission was crewed by 5 submariners, known as podvodniki in Russian. Their mission was not acknowledged until after the Cold War ended, and some secret mission files were released. This story is based on the transcript of the communications record and documentation from the spy ship's log. Names have been changed to respectfully allow anonymity for the surviving family members. The Varyag was the pride of the Russian Navy, a classified deep-sea prototype designed for secret missions at unimaginable depths. It was supposed to be unbreakable, a fortress against the crushing ocean. But, as it descended deeper into the pitch-black waters of the Arctic Sea, the 5 submariners knew that something had gone terribly wrong. The initial descent down to 10,000 feet, 3,000 meters, was quite uneventful, other than the usual groans and creaks of the submarine's hull as it strained to hold back the pressure of the unforgiving sea outside. Communication between the submarine and the mothership on the surface was good. They had released the tether lines and were now operating autonomously. They were trialling a new laser communication technology that would offer greater bandwidth and stability at depth than the existing very low frequency and extremely low frequency radio systems currently used by NATO and the Allied forces. Suddenly the submarine lurched violently as if rammed by a whale. Alarms sounded, and the lights flickered a few times before Commander Ivan Kuznetsov regained control, cancelling the alarms one by one once he was satisfied with the status and integrity of the sub and its control systems. Dmitri, what was that? Most likely a local disturbance as we transition through a thermal layer or density variation, Commander. All systems are working as they should and power is... The submarine surged and rolled again violently, plunging 60 meters, 200 feet, in a few seconds. They were all momentarily weightless and bounced around like ragdolls within the small control room, before they all crashed down into cabinets, pipes, and protruding control levers and knobs. Lights flashed, alarms squawked, and the smell of overheated cables permeated the thick, stale air inside the submarine. It was starting to feel suffocating as the choking fumes seeped from the power cabinet. Sergei Orlov, the second in command, supported his limp arm, clearly broken as he was flung across the space. Blood was flowing from a wide gash in Yelena Ivanov, the ship's navigator's forehead. Commander Ivan Kuznetsov was the first to recover and barked, "Stations, everyone!" Reseating himself, he gripped the control panel, his face pale under the dim red emergency lighting. He was a veteran, a man who had survived decades of covert missions, but this was different. The Varyag was descending too fast, and the readings were off. Way off. They all moved quickly to man their stations, their years of training kicking in to make them a professional, synchronized team. They had rehearsed and practiced for such eventualities many times over the years, but this time they were on their own, disconnected from their support vessel far above them. Anastasia Petrov, communications officer and the youngest member of the team, reached for the comms phone, but her fingers were bent backwards out of shape and were not responding due to multiple breaks and fractures. She pushed the shock aside, despite the tears welling in her eyes from the searing pain, and used her other hand to operate the comms system to raise the alarm with the trawler support ship on the surface 2 miles above them. "Что за chat?" Ivan cursed, scanning the gauges. "Dmitri, check the ballast systems again." His voice was tense but controlled. Dmitri Volkov, the chief engineer, was hunched over the system's console, his fingers moving with the precision of a man who knew the machine inside and out. Beads of sweat formed on his face. He quickly ran through a mental checklist, diagnosing the symptoms and instrumentation failures that were now lighting up the control panel like a Christmas tree. "It's not responding, Comrade Commander," Dmitri confirmed. "We've lost control of the ballast tanks. The pressure's building too fast. The fail-safes..." "Then override the damn fail-safes," Ivan barked. "There's no override at this depth." Dmitri's voice was firm, calm and confident. The others were dead silent, eyes wide, ears straining for any sound beyond the submarine's creaks and groans. Sergei Orlov, the second in command, stood near the viewport, staring into the blackness outside. Yelena Ivanov, the ship's navigator, was at her console, barely breathing. "We're descending too fast," Yelena whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "The hull wasn't designed for this." "The hull will hold," Ivan snapped, but even he didn't believe it. There was a deep groan as the submarine settled deeper into the crushing abyss, and Anastasia winced as she whispered to herself, "Boże moi, we're going to die here." The Variag had lost all of the main systems. The power breaker had tripped and could not be reset. The emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting long, dark shadows across the cabin. The creaking of the hull had become more frequent and increased in volume with the depth and water density. The oppressive weight of the ocean outside pressed in from all sides. The air felt thick with despair. There was nothing, absolutely nothing more they could do, other than prepare to die. They just didn't know when, but they did know that it wouldn't be long. Dmitri slumped in his chair, slowly rubbing his chest and wincing with pain. He'd obviously fractured a few ribs on his flight around the control room, or more specifically on his landing. He wasn't working on the controls anymore. There was no point. They were no longer operable. "We're going to be crushed," he muttered, as if in answer to everyone's unasked question. His voice was detached, factual and hollow. Like a tin can. Sergei, who had been silent until now, suddenly kicked the wall in frustration. "Don't you fucking say that! You're the engineer! You're supposed to fix this!" "There's no fixing this!" Dmitri shouted back, his voice calm and accepting. "Do you even know what happens at this depth? Do you know what's outside this hull right now?" He glanced at the depth gauge. "We are 11,800 feet below the surface. The pressure out there is over 5,250 pounds per square inch. That's..." He paused. "That's like having a tank crushing you from every direction. The human body..." He trailed off, staring at the floor as the others looked at him in horror. Ivan clenched his fists but said nothing. He needed Dmitri to finish. They all did. Dmitri swallowed hard, his eyes glassy. "If the hull fails, and it will, it's called a catastrophic implosion." Taking a long breath, he continued. "When a submarine implodes at extreme depths, the physics involved are astonishingly violent due to the immense pressure of the water surrounding the vessel. At 12,500 feet, or 3,800 meters, the pressure can exceed 6,000 pounds per square inch. The surrounding water rushes in at incredible speeds, potentially faster than the speed of sound. The collapse happens in milliseconds, much faster than a human can react. Once the hull fails, the submarine is instantly crushed inward. When the water rushes into the submarine, it does so at such a high velocity that it generates heat due to the compression of the air in the sub. The energy from the rapid compression causes a significant but brief temperature spike. This can be as high as 1,000 degrees Celsius. We will basically be vaporized." His colleagues all stared vacantly into space at the thought of their impending death. Anastasia Petrov studied her twisted, broken hand and smiled weakly at the irony of having an expensive manicure before joining the mission. She had not been given any prior notice that her next mission would be deep under the sea on a covert research project. She had hoped it would be an overseas secondment with intelligence, possibly somewhere warm and safe. Dmitri continued. "The good news is that it will be quick. It'll start with a crack. You'll hear it. The metal will scream as it bends and snaps. And then, in less than a second, the entire sub will collapse inward. The water will rush in, faster than you can blink. It'll crush our lungs, our bones. Our bodies will be flattened instantly. We won't even have time to scream." Tears welled in their eyes. Dmitri blinked his away as he reached to take the bottle of Stolichnaya vodka from Commander Ivan Kuznetsov. He raised the bottle in salute. "Za podvodnikov!" He toasted to his comrades before handing the bottle around. The silence in the cabin was unbearable after Dmitri's words. Anastasia had started crying softly, her face buried in her hands. Yelena was staring blankly at the console in front of her, as if trying to will herself away from this nightmare. Sergei, his hands trembling, muttered, God damn you, Dimitri. Dimitri just closed his eyes. I didn't build this sub. The descent hadn't stopped. The Variag kept falling deeper and deeper toward the ocean floor. The depth gauge needle was hard against the display stop of 14,000 feet. The hull was groaning constantly now, the sounds like moans of a dying beast. Every creak, every snap of the metal sent shivers through the crew. Ivan could still hear Tatiana, his wife's voice, telling him to come home safe. But there was no coming home from this. What about communications? Ivan asked Anastasia, his voice hoarse. I've tried, she whispered, her eyes red and puffy from crying. The antenna's damaged. We can only transmit, and I've left the channel open as per protocol. It's just us down here. Fuck, Sergei shouted suddenly, punching the wall again, harder this time. His knuckles bled, but he didn't seem to care. You knew, didn't you? He turned to Dimitri, eyes wild. You knew this would happen. This was your fucking design. Dimitri stood unsteady, glaring back. Don't you dare put this on me, Sergei. I built this sub with the specs they gave me. You think I wanted this? Sergei lunged at Dimitri, shoving him hard against the wall. You knew the risks, and you said nothing. We're dead because of you. Ivan pulled Sergei off, his voice commanding despite the chaos and the pain shooting through his chest. Enough! He shoved Sergei back, but even Ivan could feel his authority slipping. We're dead anyway, Sergei growled, his face a mask of rage. We're fucking dead, and it's his fault. And then it happened. A loud crack. Ivan closed his eyes. It's time, he whispered. Tsar Podvodnikov! Sergei screamed, a sound full of rage and terror, but it was drowned out by the thunderous roar of the ocean crushing the Varian. The hull buckled inward, the walls collapsing with a sickening crunch. The sea swallowed them whole. In the span of a heartbeat, the Variag was gone.
Bloody Mary's Horror Stories. Watch, like, and subscribe.